Ah, so thanks and welcome so then but hang on, I'll just do this so that we'll know later when cutting that we started with the recording. So thank you for inviting me for the presentation about the new German plug-in PV norm. I'm Sebastian Müller. I'm the chair of the Balkonsolarverein, which is the plug-in PV association. We were funded in Freiburg in 2021, and we've been doing all kinds of plug-in PV related stuff. I guess some people might know our website, balkon.solar. There's a very small English section on it as well. It's mostly oriented on people in Germany and a little bit in Switzerland and Austria, and some very little English things when we go to the European Commission or other things. I put you in some pictures of plug-in PV systems, mostly from Freiburg or around the Freiburg area. Also, like a house we discovered 2 weeks ago, this yellow house that has solar on every balcony. We don't know if it's a plug-in PV system, but it looks like that. And we also got the Black Forest house and the historic building here. I've been around in that area around 2019 when I got my first plug-in PV system. I then went on to write an article for the German Make in 2021, where we used old solar panels to make new plug-in PV systems and sort of popularized the thing. Out of that grew a book. The book's already old and outdated. And Christian Ofenhäusler and his friends wrote a better one. I also wrote one with him, but there's now a new book on the market that's far better and far more current. And if you read German, do that. And quite a lot of the activities of our association is also doing plug-in PV. We take old panels that come down from buildings that used to get their solar system in the early 2000s, when sorts of Renewables Act and feed-in tariffs were a new thing, and they are now at the end of their life as a feed-in tariff solar system. And then they come down, and then we can reuse them for plug-in PV or for something else. Most of the panels are still okay, and they still work, and they still have like 95 to 90% of the original capacity. And so it's a very cheap way of doing it. However, because Chinese solar panels imports are so cheap now, if you add up mounting, very often the new system is also in a very competitive price range. So you can think about what you want to do. Okay, hang on. So how does plug-in PV work? I guess you all know you have 1 to 4 solar panels, usually a microinverter that transforms that into 240 volts and 50 hertz, and only produces it when it sees a grid on the other side. You can use a standard socket to connect it. The consumers in your house use your own electricity first, and your meter runs slower and it pushes the excess energy that you don't use into the grid. And you can already see on the meter symbol I used, most of the meters in Germany are non-digital, non-smart. They are conventional meters, the same we had since, I don't know, 1950s, 1960s. It gets more difficult, but also more exciting once you start adding batteries, because then you have more solar panels, obviously. You can feed into a battery. About 2 kilowatts is usually the size of the systems right now, and it's also a sensible size. You don't need to go that much bigger. And then you need two other things, either some kind of measuring device on your smart meter, which is like these little dots you can put onto the infrared thing. The infrared thing is a German thing. In other European countries, they have other kinds of connection of your smart meter and that, or you put in some kind of measuring device straight into the fuse box, which I have in my apartment here. It's one of these, it's usually called a Shelly, because Shelly is the dominant brand. They are available from a couple of brands, but Shelly works with most of the systems. And then you have sort of the ability that you know how much you consume at any time, and you can tell the battery system only to put in as much electricity as you consume at any time, and this conserve the rest for the night and so on. And I have that here on my roof, and I have a 2 kilowatt battery. And if I have a normal sunny day, then it's actually full in the evening and has around 50% in the morning. So that's one thing. Mounting is another thing, and we also see that most of the biggest sorts of slice is mounted on balconies or at balconies, but also a substantial amount has different kinds of mounting. So we see like the flat roof, which I got with that nice solar punk here. We see quite a lot of fences. The table is fairly simple because you can use the €5 IKEA leg for the table, and you can also put them into the garden. If you have a garden, that's a fairly simple way of doing it. Fence is becoming really interesting because the panels are so cheap that they are now cheaper than the actual wooden fencing material. So that you can actually save on money and you get a fence that produces electricity. Now we are getting into the legal preconditions, and I made you this nice wall, what you need to regulate when you want to have plug-in PV. And that's quite a lot. And we now have the technical norm, and this technical norm is again based on other technical norms or incorporates them. The essential regulation is that the inverter technical norm already says you have to achieve total turn-off within 200 milliseconds for a grid-connected power generation system. The technical norm for plug-in PV is actually even stronger, but I'll get to that in detail later. But we had a couple of other sorts of building details for that. We had to have a legal definition what it actually is in the Renewable Act, and that led to the simplification of registration. So you can only register it with, you don't need to register it with your local grid operator. It only has to be registered once with the national grid. And even if you don't register it with the national grid, with 75% of people do, or the fine that you would incur is minimal. And we don't know of any people who've actually been fined. I think they don't even fine people with large solar systems because the fine is not getting a feed-in tariff. We also know that the personal liability insurance companies now included, so it's part of the standard contract. What we don't know is what they say if your system is not norm conforming, because so far there were no norm conforming systems. And then the Bundestag also made two things with the laws regarding to housing. It put into the contract law a right to plug-in PV. So as the tenant, you can apply, and the landlord has to give permission or demonstrate with arguments that you can follow and that make sense, that it is too dangerous and that you cannot do that. That his interest in not putting it up exceed your interest in putting it up. And you have quite a lot of interest because it's not only saving money, but also protecting the environment and achieving zeros and so on. They put the same into the condominium law, and because the Renewables Act says that the use of renewables enhances public safety, national security, public health, and is in public interest, the municipality that has to give a permission to use solar, if your house is a monument and it's protected, has to balance that interest of national security, public interest, and health with that of the protection of the monument. So if you don't live in the super monument protected house from medieval times that has complete monument status on everything, then you can probably do it. Yeah. So, and then it's also, we got a tax breaks. Everything that is solar related has zero sales tax. That's quite nice. Yeah. And it's really strange because nothing else in Germany has zero sales tax, not including like basic food or hygiene products or whatever. It's only solar that has zero sales tax. Short look at the market. What we know, we probably have around 3 to 4 million systems in Germany. If we calculate that, right, is about 10% of all households. Probably a third might be a third is registered we get from surveys. So 77% did it themselves, 4% had an electrician somehow involved. About half of the systems have a battery now. And we know also that most of them are in single-family homes and houses and places that are owned by their owners. That is sort of a thing in Germany. Owning your house is not normal, unlike in the US. In the US, most people own the house they live in. In Germany, I think only a third of the population owns the house it lives in. Usually, Germans rent from someone, and they usually live in an urban setting, in an apartment, not in a house. So that also explains why plug-in PV is far more common on the countryside, because on the countryside, people live in houses they own, whereas in the city, people live in a condominium they own and they have to go to the condo board, as I had to do, or they have to go to some landlord, and as bigger and as the landlord is, even if it's maybe a co-op or a municipal landlord, as big as more problematic plug-in PV gets. Coming to the norm, we can see that in Germany, in theory, all households in the European Union should have a smart meter. But we know that smart meter adoption in Germany is really low, and it's on par with highly developed European countries like Bulgaria or Romania, and not as with standard countries like Finland, where everybody has a smart meter, or in France, where 95% have a smart meter. And we also know that building stock in Germany I'm not sure how good that study actually is, because it was done on behalf of an electrical engineering of a company that sells electrical equipment. But if we take it as face value, we know that up to 20% of the